The following case is very distressing, viewer discretion is advised. Two men who subjected a 17-year-old girl to multiple rapes and beatings after abducting her from Ipswich and holding her captive in a London bedroom have been jailed. Abdul Howe and Ajani Williams, both 21, repeatedly attacked the victim by beating her with nunchucks and threatening her with a knife before forcing her to record a voice note saying that she had consented to the extreme and humiliating sexual violence. After she was released from Howe's address in Hammersmith, 3 days after she was kidnapped on September 20, 2020, she reported her ordeal to police officers at Lewisham Police Station. The two men were later arrested and following an 8-week trial at Isleworth Crown Court, were convicted and have now been locked behind bars. The court heard that the victim was just 14 to 15 years old when she first began engaging with Howe on social media. While they had engaged in a casual consensual relationship, his true motive was to groom her into running his county line drugs operation in Ipswich, named the Alfie Line. Judge Fiona Berry summarized. She certainly did not appreciate the danger that you presented, and when she crossed you, she was wholly out of her depth. The trigger to the offending came after the victim decided to either destroy or steal a consignment of drugs, which made Howe determined to make her pay for disrespecting him. She continued. What followed was the most horrific sexual violence designed to punish her for crossing you, to break her will, and to bring her into line. Unbeknown to her, you traveled to Ipswich and arranged to have her kidnapped. In the early hours of September 20, 2020, she left her home address in her night clothes in order to complete what she thought was a 2-minute drugs deal. After entering a taxi, Howe followed her into the vehicle and placed her in a headlock, threatened her with a large sword, and said he was happy to have found her. She was then driven to the Piri Piri hostel where she was taken to a room and had her phone confiscated. Your treatment of her, both in that hostel and subsequently in London, was shocking and brutal, Judge Berry continued. You beat her about her head and body with a pair of wooden nunchucks, leaving her with bruises and swelling to her head, arms, legs and hands where she tried to protect herself. You subjected her to extreme and humiliating sexual violence. You ripped off her shorts and forced a gloved hand deep into her vagina to search for drugs in front of others in the room. She was crying out in pain and begged you to stop, but you ignored her. She was then raped twice and kept in the hostel room for a period of 5 hours and was not even permitted to use the bathroom. Howe also continued to ring her boyfriend to make demands before organizing a taxi to take them to London. By the time she entered that vehicle she had been beaten and raped over several hours. She was evidently injured and scared and she had no choice but to go with you. You were still armed with a knife, she had been brutally assaulted and there was nowhere to escape. She tried during that journey to alert the driver to her plight, but he plainly didn't want to get involved. She was then taken to Waldo Road and was kept by both Howe and Williams for a period of 2 days. The cramped room was littered with several Rambo knives and she was under constant watch and was even escorted to the communal toilets. What happened to her in that room, over the course of those 2 days, was nothing short of horrific, Judge Berry said. Not only was she subjected to further gratuitous violence from you, Mr. Howe, punching her to her body, she was also subjected to further humiliating, depraved sexual violence. The victim was raped simultaneously by both men on 3 occasions and was called fat and ugly while they placed hands over her mouth so she couldn't call for help. She was eventually freed on September 23 on the condition that she continued to sell drugs and work off her debt. She was then made to shower before the 2 men forced her to record a voice message, agreeing that all sexual activity had been consensual. Instead of returning to Ipswich as instructed, the victim reported her ordeal to the police, and the 2 men were arrested, with Howe embarking on a concerted effort to intimidate the vulnerable teenager. The 2 of you forced her to make a voice note on Mr. Howe's iPhone to say that all sexual activity was consensual, Judge Berry added. You arrogantly thought that this would provide you with some form of insurance should she defy you and go to the police. In fact, it had the opposite effect, Judge Berry said. In the recordings, the victim can be heard crying with Howe later instructing his mum and sister to edit the evidence and remove his absent SIM card from his phone. He also asked others to use his Snapchat account to intimidate the victim into dropping the case, telling her she was singing on the wrong people. While the judge acknowledged that Williams had not been present at the kidnapping in Ipswich, she rejected the defense that he had no knowledge of what had occurred and had played a passive role. There was a significant element of degradation and humiliation, Judge Berry continued. This was sexual violence specifically designed to punish and humiliate the victim. As well as being raped, Howe had encouraged others at the hostel to urinate upon her, with the judge ruling that her treatment amounted to torture. Since the incident, the victim has suffered severe psychological harm and experiences intrusive thoughts, paranoia and anxiety. It was also noted that she had been a particularly vulnerable teenager who was prone to going missing and skipping school and was therefore an easier target for grooming. Sentencing them to lengthy custodial sentences, Judge Berry said. The offending was not impulsive at all. It was well planned and executed as an act of revenge. The victim was subject to the most terrible and sadistic sexual violence designed to humiliate and degrade. It was committed against a backdrop of sustained criminal conduct in which both defendants were involved in the supply of drugs. Howe was jailed for 20 years and 8 months on 2 counts of kidnap, 7 counts of rape, 1 count of possession of an item with a blade or point, 1 count of sexual assault by penetration, 1 count of false imprisonment, 2 counts of actual bodily harm, and 1 count of perverting the course of justice. Williams was jailed for 16 years and 4 months for false imprisonment, actual bodily harm, 5 counts of rape, and 1 count of perverting the course of justice. He also pleaded guilty to possession with intent to supply a Class B drug. EC Tony Larkin, who led the investigation, said, "The offenses committed by these men against a vulnerable teenage girl are abhorrent, and her account is one of the most distressing I have ever heard. They are extremely dangerous individuals, and our city will be safer now they are off our streets." The victim in this case has shown incredible bravery, from initially coming forward and reporting what had happened to providing the vital evidence which secured the verdicts. We hope this shows how seriously we take allegations of this nature and that we will provide support at every step of the way to ensure justice is served.